Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of the People Progressing podcast with Rocio, Perez. And I am really excited about having you on. Your story is going to really inspire a lot of people. So let's kind of get right into it. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us where you grew up, some of the things that influenced you as a kid, and we'll kind of go from there.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, first of all, such a pleasure to be here with you today and share my life story to inspire people. So thank you so much. Can't wait. Well, I'm going to start off in the beginning where Rocio started. And when I was a little girl, Joe, I would run around with my tattered bucks. This is around the age of 5. And I was fascinated by life, fascinated by learning. And I would talk with anyone that would ever listen, say, someday I'm going to grow up and I'm going to become a teacher. And I remember seeing this teacher on television, speaking with the little children and inspiring them. I just thought it was so neat and fascinated by that. I would spend my days daydreaming of what life would be in the future. I would speak with my older brother someday, what are you going to be when you grow up? I know what I'm going to be when I grow up. And very moved and inspired by that vision. And as I was growing up, I would go I was on the ABC honor roll, 1, 2, 3, you name it. I would cry. I was that kid that would cry so that she can go to school. That was me. Yet my reality was very far-fetched, Joe. I shouldn't be alive. From age 3, I was sexually, mentally, and physically abused by my own parents. At around the age of 5, I contemplated suicide, and I really knew how to do it. I was at that point in my life, I had experienced so much pain and suffering that I didn't know if I could go another day. And I thought about running in front of a semi. I'm like, it'll be over. And something stopped me in that moment. And I said, okay, I just kept on going on with my life and continued to daydream. I continued to believe. I knew that the life that I lived in would not be the life that I would live. I was referenced to as my mother's slave. I helped take care of my younger brothers. I did some of the cooking, cleaning, shopping, sometimes those grocery bags for a 9-year-old to be walking down the street with, and I'm talking about a full week's worth of groceries for 5 kids and 1 adult, is a lot of groceries. And sometimes those paper bags would tear before I even got home and I would get in trouble. And I'm right there trying to struggle, carrying 25 pounds of meat, carrying a gallon of milk, carrying whatever other staples we needed for that week. And I would get beaten up when I got home because the bags tore and things may have gotten damaged. And, I grew up in Southern Texas, moving from point A to point B, starting over and over and over again. My father sometimes would get himself in trouble. He had trouble with alcohol. He couldn't keep a job sometimes. He couldn't keep things going for himself and for the family, much less himself. That we suffered a lot through that. And at times he would come home and he's like, pack your bags, we're leaving. And it wasn't like, the movers are coming, here's the pickup truck. It's whatever fit in the trunk of a car for 5 children and 2 adults. And most of that, we didn't get to choose it. It's what my mother felt was important. She would carry this little makeup caboodle, and in that she would put in all of our documents, birth certificates, the very few pictures that we have in life, all fit in there. And we would start all over again. And every time we would leave everything behind, start from 0 all over again to the tune of over 13 times during the time that I lived with them. Being sent away with my aunts and uncles at one point in my life, I was roughly going on 6 years old. I stayed with my aunts and uncles after, it was already known that my father was sexually abusing me. Like the worst time for me was the night. I would hide under my bed, fearing the night, fearing the darkness, because I knew what would happen. I was threatened by him that if I told, people in my life would be killed. And I believed it. And being sent away until I was almost 8 years old, coming back home and us moving to yet again another town. abuse continuing of all kinds. My mother would abuse me physically and verbally and throughout the day, and my father at night. And then when we moved, some of those patterns still continued mainly with my mom, although my father tried again and again. And as I was getting older, it's like I didn't know who to trust. I couldn't trust my mother. I couldn't understand why there was so much hatred and so much pain and so much everything. As a matter of fact, even recollecting this Mother's Day right now for me, I'm shopping around, looking at Mother's Day cards, and I'm like, why am I doing this? And it took me to that moment as I'm standing in front of those Mother's Day cards this Mother's Day to look back to that 8-year-old little girl who was on top of the chair, who was excited, who had created this beautiful Mother's Day card saying, I love you, Mom, to only get knocked down, literally making my nose bleed, fall to the ground, and being told, you're not my daughter. Don't you ever dare say anything like that again. And always being referenced as this other person, like I didn't belong to her. Growing up with that, growing up with being told, don't ever ask me for help with your homework because I'm never going to help you. I'm never going to be there for you. So don't even bother. That only drove me to seek things that I could now understand. That was, I excelled in school. I loved learning. I loved connecting. I loved doing so many things throughout life. We ended up moving from Texas, and that's where I was born and partly raised, moved to Colorado, tried to start all over again. It was my mom, this time leaving my father. She was done with the abuse and the alcohol. And then we went back. We were only here for maybe a month or so. And then we went back again, threats. My mom believed it. She was afraid of him. And, my father was a different person. He was what you would call an abusive alcoholic, very apologetic, trying to be nice for temporary moments. And then life went back to the way it was, very ruthless. We ended up moving that following summer. 2 summers later, I was living with my aunt. So almost immediately after we went back, we moved yet again. And thinking of things that really shaped my life is, what did it look like? There was a moment in time right before that move, still around the age of 8, and I was horrified because bikers would ride around back in southern Texas with their guns on their backs. They were ruthless. We lived in the outskirts of the city. What would you expect? And I remember one day my father, as I was pleading, please don't leave me here by myself because I'm afraid, given I was the only girl, 4 boys, middle child, they would leave me home because I wasn't worthy. I was dirty. I was abused. I was sexually abused, and we don't bring her around. And my gosh, that moment, my father put me inside of the bathtub and beat me up with the hose full of water, and beat me up with the hose so that I would never ask him again to go with him or with anyone. So those moments, when you talk about moments that shape my life, Mother's Day card, asking for help, not being believed when I said, he's abusing me again, not being by my own mother, being put in these situations. Here's another situation. I live next door with my aunt at that time. And, I was always that little girl that tried to find things to do. When I was 5, 6 years old, I was selling copper down the street because I figured that's how you make money. I saw my older brothers. That's how you do it. When we moved to another town, I was helping my great aunt and I would get money. So I'm like, great, I can go at the age of 8 years old, go clean a house and get money to go buy the things that I want. And some of them like really that I need because it was a necessity in time. Getting basic food for me sometimes was a necessity.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to use the washer because I wasn't worthy. Although I had to wash everybody's clothes, I was not worthy of using the washer. And it was it was just a horrible situation that I grew up in. And at the same time, I had this light in me that kept on guiding me, like, keep moving forward, keep moving forward. You've got this. Let me find a way. In the midst of so much darkness, I found joy inside of me. I saw a vision inside of me, what was possible. I saw a belief. And yes, there was times that I believed that someday my real parents were going to come and pick me up, because real parents don't do this to their children. They don't put them through this abuse or do the things that they did to me. And I remember one day before we moved to Colorado, I was playing out there. Very few times was I allowed to ever go outside and play. This time I was playing with my brother. My mom checked out mentally. Years prior, she checked out mentally. And I fell and I hit the corner of a concrete stair, which I have on my right side a slit on my head where I'm bleeding, like literally bleed. I could feel the cold blood coming down my face. And when I go to see my mom, I was like, Mom, I'm bleeding. Like, help me. And she's like, go lock the door, go lock the back door, because it was getting late. It was around 6 p.m. that night. And I'm like, okay. I didn't get medical care. As a matter of fact, when my father did come home, so 6 o'clock at night, roughly, when my father did get home, as he's cleaning up the wound in the middle of the night, he's fondling my chest. I was 10 years old at that time and just completely horrified between like not feeling well, what's going like, and completely confused, knowing that this is wrong. And then as I moved forward, we couldn't even get it stitched up, because by the time I got medical care, it was over 18 hours. And that was a cutoff line.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was nothing. It just something that had to heal on its own. Fast forward, we moved into Texas. We moved into Colorado from Texas, start all over again from zero again, if you could only imagine. Moved to my grandparents, moved out to our own place. And sometimes it was brutal. It was brutal. I'd have to get up early in the morning. I'm talking about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to help my mom pack my father's lunch, help my mom take care of my brothers. They were my responsibility. I had to take care of them and get them ready, clothed, bed, fed, whatever they needed it done. And if I had time and had the privilege, I would iron dry my brother's jeans that he allowed me to use because I wasn't worthy of getting clothes. It was the boys that were worthy of getting clothes. I would iron dry it as best I could. And if you could only imagine, in the middle of winter, you live in Colorado, those pants were stiff.
Yeah, they're frozen. Yeah.
Walking down the street, trying to make it into school and pretend that everything was fine.
Yeah.
Everybody thought everything was fine. Why? Because I pretended, because I believed. And, there's so much to my story where I learned to lie at a very young age to be safe. Being beaten with a whip. My mother would beat us with a whip, a horse whip. It was a short horse whip. She would mainly, I got the brunt of it. And that was the way that she dealt with things. And if you say anything to anyone, it's going to be worse where you go. As a little girl, as a first grader, I didn't know if there could be anything worse. I couldn't even think of anything worse.
Yeah.
So I never said anything. Fast forwarding through life as we're in Colorado, there was a time that I couldn't disagree like a normal girl, and I was disagreeing with my neighbor friend. Well, my father stood me in front of this neighbor friend, let her beat me up, took me home, beat me up so bad that I couldn't even, even the feel of my shirt on my body was so painful. Much forget laying down. Just the touch of the clothes on my body. And there was a moment in time where I had run away and came back. And then I ran away again. And this time before I ran away, my parents there was 2 beds, one on each side of the room, twin beds. And my mother would grab me like a rag doll, toss me over, and he would start beating me up and toss me over. They were like, I was a rag doll between them both. Finally kicked him in the groin. And I'm like, he runs out of the room. My mother starts laughing. I'm like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like, how can you be doing this to your children?
Yeah.
And from that, it only got worse. And, within a couple of weeks, they were leaving again. And this was like my moment of being told, like, I shouldn't even be alive. And I know that, I get that. Or in a really, really bad shape, as, on drugs or God knows what. What I do know is those last moments that I spent with them, those last days, my family had enough, and everybody knew the abuse. Everybody knew it. It was just, nobody said anything, and at that time, it was my younger uncle who was roughly about my age. He was around 16 at the time. And my father's literally slapping me into the kitchen. You don't belong in the living room. You belong in the kitchen. And my mother slapping me out of the kitchen, get out of here. She's like, you're the worst thing that ever happened. You were garbage. I found you in a dumpster. Like, can you imagine what that does to the soul of a human being to hear that? And there was moments where I'm like, okay, I'm like, I don't know. I ended up blacking out. And this is something that I found out later, 30 years later, almost, from my uncle who was there. And so I pled to my grandmother 2 days before we left. And I'm like, Grandma, please, like, I know, they're going to kill me. And she looked at me dead in the face and says, I know. I'm like, I need you to help me.
Yeah.
Here's this puny young teenage girl trying to figure out life. And I did, and she did help me, and my uncle did help me. It was mainly the 16-year-old that says, I'm going to help you, as I stood there in front of my grandmother, and he did. And so on January 3rd, 1989, I ran around 6 p.m. into the night, if you can only remember, like, how cold it is, with a little windbreaker. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm gone. I'm never going to come back. Life went on, and my parents left town. I stayed. I moved in with my grandparents, and life was better. It wasn't ideal. I started smoking and drinking and partying and ditching to numb the pain. Like, I couldn't understand, like, mental health was definitely not something there, or any type of trauma care wasn't there.
So I totally get that. I want to go back to one thing you said. There was something in you, and you called it the bright light, that kept you still believing in yourself and kept you believing where you're going to go and what your life was going to be. Can you explain that a little bit? I mean, what was that? Where did that come from, or where do you think it came from?
Well, that's such a great question. I believe that we're all born with it. I believe to some degree we get disconnected, given for me, the only place that I could exist to be safe was that imagination, that same imagination that you see in a 3-year-old, that you see in a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
I kept touch with that imagination, because that imagination was heaven in comparison to what I was living.
Yeah.
And that was my safe haven. That's the way that I survived. That's the way that I moved through life and made things happen for myself. And that's the reason why I believe I'm here, to keep that focus, because that focus, that vision of that better future, that brighter light, that everything kept me through life. In every aspect, there was moments where my mother, I remember being 9 years old and her beating me up so bad. And she's like, I just want to see you cry. And I'm like, you don't get to see that. You can do whatever. It's something that I've seen 30 years later through Viktor Frankl's work, when I became familiar with it, that you can't do anything to me, right? Unless I allow you to. Like, that you may hit me, you may do whatever. My response to it is my response to it. And going back to that bright light got me through those moments of despair, the moments of trying to figure it out, because it wasn't perfect and it wasn't ideal. And I was going to be returned. I ended up being raped by one of those uncles. I was 14. After he had gotten us drunk, older person. And then the next thing I know, fast forward, my grandparents were going to take me home. because I was too much trouble and into that. And it's like, I didn't do anything. Like, all I'm merely trying to do is to stay alive.
Trying to survive.
And I ended up doing what I thought was best. I always felt that I made the best decision with what was in front of me at the time. Here I'm 14 years old. I had met a guy in late December. This is February. I ended up running away with him. He's 8 years my senior. He's 22 years old. I'm 14 years old. I run away with him. And if you could only imagine, 2 weeks later, I'm pregnant. And now, given the culture, given everything, I'm expected to be a woman. And like, I have to full-blown woman life, cooking, cleaning, taking care of a partner, doing everything. And as I delivered my son at the age of 15, I knew that bright light was there. Like, it was there. That dream was there. I'm like, knowing being a Latina, 15 years old, working menial labor in an abusive relationship. My family didn't care about it. 6th grade educated. He didn't stand a chance in life. I had to go out and create it. And for me, it was doing whatever it took. So at the age of 15, I was knocking on the Community College of Denver's doors so that they can let me in. And I was a rebel because they're like, you're 15. I'm like, I know. Well, your parents have to come in and sign. You have to be 16 and your parents have to sign. I'm like, I haven't seen them in 3.5 years and they have no desire to see me. How is that going to happen? Right? The only way, as a little rebel, that I figured out how to do it, I kept on asking, this is my dream. What else? There's got to be something else. This can't be it. And Rosemary looked at me and said, the only other way is that if you get emancipated. And to me, it was like the biggest word I ever knew, because it was like, it just seemed like so big. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, if that's the only way, I'm going to go figure out how to do that. And she's like, well, it means you divorce your parents. Okay. And I did. 30 days later, I was in front of a judge divorcing my parents and started moving on with life. I went to university. You can only imagine when I was accepted, when I was of age and could be accepted. And I started university at the age of 17. And it was definitely a journey. I'm not sure if it was like right before I was turning 17, started university, and it was uphill both ways. I'd go to bed at midnight after doing my homework. I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. That same person who was abusing me, beating me up, cooking his lunch, making my son's lunch, packing my lunch. And by 4:15 in the morning, I'm walking down the street with a 2-year-old in my arms in the middle of winter, and with a diaper bag and a backpack. It's heavy enough to carry a backpack to begin with. Forget all of that. To the tune of almost 4 hours just to go drop off my son so that I can come back and make it to school and eat that same lunch that I made at 3 o'clock in the morning as I'm walking through campus to make it to class on time. And then do it all over again in the evening. And the irony is that his father had a car that was just parked there all day. He didn't want me to succeed, that no woman was ever going to be better than him, and that I would live that life forever. To, the things that I've done, I feel like I've had to do in there, the threats where, like, you leave, you're a minor, your family doesn't care for you. I'm the adult. I'm the one who has the steady job and the track record. You don't stand a chance. And I believed him. And I believed him because of the things that I experienced. When I went over to a shelter, they told me, no, we can't help you. I'm being abused. You can't help me. I'm a teenager. You can't help me. And being turned away, and still at the same time, even though I was turned away, I'm like, nope, there's got to be another way. There's got to be another way. We ended up being homeless, which allowed us to, at the age of 19, I sold my car. I had $500 in my pocket. I dropped off his check, his car. I came home. I packed up all of our belongings, my son's, everything that I had purchased, because he wasn't the type of person that would purchase things for him to what he needed. And so I packed all of that, and we were homeless, which gave us an opportunity to start all over again. It was the best thing that ever happened, because I went from being a person who wondered about life staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night as I'm laying on the floor thinking, how am I going to get away? Because what I've tried, I've failed over and over again. I would leave, he would find me, he'd threaten me, he'd bring me back. Finally, I found a way, and I was working for this program that Good Neighbors was called, the program. I'm not even sure if it's still in existence. I would work 130 hours a month in exchange for an apartment for them, with them. And then on my extra time, I would work cleaning houses so that I can provide for whatever it is that we needed. And then we qualified, because that was where we were at. We ended up qualifying for a 2-year transitional housing. And to me, that was heaven. That was heaven, because I had the opportunity to start all over again, have a stable place to live where I can work a normal 40 hours a week and go to university and take care of my son and myself and do whatever I needed to do. And that was life. That was life. I just continued moving forward. And there was a lot of moments, I start mentoring students at the age of 19, getting people who were twice my senior, old enough to be my parents, who were on their second degrees, getting them through university, people that were more highly educated. And that was life. And one of the things that I realized in that time, it's like, I just did what it took. I did what it took. I got up, I made a decision. I kept on moving towards that light, despite what was happening in my surrounding. And that was the first 20 years of my life.
I want to go back to when you were 15 and you had your son. This is very interesting to me, because it seems like even your facial expression when you said you had your son at 15 kind of changed in a way of almost like your purpose in life changed. Does that make sense? You had a whole new purpose in life that was, greater than yourself, because before it was survival mode. I mean, you made it to 15 on survival mode. I mean, it's an amazing story. And then all of a sudden you're having a son. Now you're survival mode plus. What power of purpose happened there? Is that a fair question to ask?
That is a fair question, very fair question. Well, as I was growing up and seeing the way my parents treated me, the way that my extended family treated their children, I made a vow to my future children that when I had children, that I would honor and respect and love and care for them and support them. To me, having my son was a huge deal, because I made the decision to have him. I made the decision. Okay. Yeah. And I went through with it, and it was not an easy decision when I had a social worker, when I had a partner that didn't support me in many ways and in that way, and didn't, here I had a social worker who said, because you're 14 years old, we're going to take your kid away from you when he's born. Which she followed through on that promise. As a matter of fact, the day that I was delivering, she was in the hallway. And the doctor told her, unless she had a bench warrant, she was not allowed to be there, that she needed to leave. Okay.
Wow.
So the triumph of, gosh, those moments are so emotional. The triumph of keeping him and providing the best life that I knew how, even though I didn't know how. Let's just be frank, right? In that aspect, how would I know how? Because I hadn't experienced it, yet I've seen it. And therefore I can try and do it and go over and over again. I knew that I needed to write to him, to read to him, to be kind to him, to do all the things, like the complete opposite of what it was. Yes, he became my purpose, because I knew it's like, now I have this life. I cannot allow for what happened to me to happen to him.
Yeah.
I must give it, like, if he's going to have a future, I must go out and create it. And that's what I did.
Where would you be without him? Where do you think you would have gone 14, 15 years old if you didn't have your son at that time? Do you think you still would have gone forward with your life with the purpose that you had to get into university, to do all those things? Or I think go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I don't think I would have. I don't think I would have to that degree, because now I had something bigger than me that I had to rescue. from the situation that I was in. Interesting, you're the first person that I believe has asked me this in an interview, to be able to take him and say, you know what, he deserves better. Like, and I have the ability to go out and create it, because what I did see around my life was conformity. As a matter of fact, that was one of my first essays in university, was talking about how we have the opportunity, either we conform or we move on. You know, we go out and create the life that we want to create. And there is a price to it. It's stepping outside of our comfort zone, right? And sometimes that level of effort, yes, it's 8 hours on a bus to and from school, walking, you know, waiting for buses, taking buses, carrying baby, doing whatever, you know, showing up to school with a 2-year-old who's sick, and you cannot take him to daycare, and maybe I could only afford $10 a day in daycare. The daycare on campus was $16 a day.
Yeah.
And I could not afford $16 a day.
Yeah. It's just a fascinating story. And I have a saying that when your purpose is greater than yourself, then you really find your purpose. You find why you're here. And that's kind of true in what you've just been talking about with your son, and where you would be without your son, and the purpose that he gave you in your life, I think is just extraordinary. And I want to go back a little bit too, is that a lot of people who grow up in abusive, families and all that, kind of continue that trend later on in life. What do you think made you not continue on with that in life and take a 180-degree opposite approach to that?
That's a very great question, and one that's definitely warrants a response into that. I think a lot of us, for me, it was my vision. Okay, I made a decision.
Right.
And one thing is to make a decision, and the other thing is to make a choice. Not only did I make a decision, I made a choice.
Oh, I love it.
Okay.
Love it.
Decision, I'm never going to do this. You know, I'm going to treat my son with honor and respect, love and support, all of that. Choice, how am I going to go about that? And I remember, because there was a moment, and sometimes it was rough. I remember when I was barely starting university, my son, you know, one day he was really upset, and I can pinpoint that moment. He was hitting on me. You know, here I have this 2-year-old hitting, slapping me, scratching me because he's upset. And I remember what came over my mind, and I'm like, wow, like I could really get upset and react. And if I react, I'm going to do exactly the same thing that my mother did.
Yeah.
Either I tap into her anger, or I tap into what I want to create.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
And forward through that. And I remember when he was 4 years old, because his father wasn't kind to him either. You know, he was not a loving, compassionate father. You know, if he felt the little guy was not doing well, he would shoo him away or push him away or spank him or whatever he would do. And I'm like, wow, you know, like there's got to be another way. First of all, I've got to get away, get us away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Second of all, when I remember seeing my son, that the people who we hang around with, we become, whether we want to or not.
Yeah.
Whether they're positive, negative, nurture, not nurture, whatever they are, we become. And we must be very conscious of that. And I remember when he was 4 years old, before we left, my son was playing in the kitchen, on the kitchen floor. And he's like, oh, and he loved boxcars. And he's like, oh, and my mom gets upset and she'll be like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, never again will my son say that. I was 19. Okay. This is January. I immediately enrolled in a parenting course. There's something that I knew that my communication was
awesome.
off.
Yeah.
And I started right there to make that decision and the choice, and go to school, go take my classes in the evening so that I can become a better parent and learn how to communicate. One of the greatest things that I took with him from that class for him was to teach him, son, what happened? Right? These were his timeouts. What happened? Why did it happen? And what would you do differently? That opportunity, I knew if he couldn't reflect, he couldn't understand what happened.
Right. Yeah.
I was constantly hit for something that I had no idea what happened.
Yeah.
Right. And I figured if he knew, that was going to serve him in life. Call it universe, call it whatever you want to call it. There's a higher power, an inner power. There is an internal knowing inside of each of us. When we silence our mind, we can actually hear what is not being said.
Yeah.
So when we silence our mind, we can hear what's not being said. And that's the beauty of life, where I learned to do that. Again, those were decisions. And it wasn't easier. You know, there's a lot of things that I don't cover because it also relates to my family. But there's a lot of things that people in my family don't want to hear in public. You know, that this is just the tip of the iceberg of the things that I've experienced. And I've had to be that role model for my siblings and my cousins and people around in my world. And because of my strength, because of my actions, not because of my words, because of what I did and who I was, and leading with leadership, tenacity, grit, being that person that kept on moving forward, so many people have graduated from university because of that. So many people were inspired to become because I led the way without saying anything. They got to see what was possible. And so, and I think one of the things, Joe, that I think it's important to cover too, is that there's moments that shape us, because we may be on top of the world.
Yeah.
I'd graduated. I remember a mentor of mine said, Rocio, how does it feel to graduate? I'm like, it feels great. You know, like I have a job, I have all these things. It's a great opportunity. And when I was 25, I was on a head-on collision that nearly left me in a wheelchair. Like, life continued to happen. You asked me what led me through all this. Okay. My son led me through that, because if I wasn't there to take care of him, because even my own mom turned her back on me.
Yeah.
When I said I need back surgery because I can't even stand to walk. The pain is so excruciating. I needed traction every day. I was seeing doctors 6 days a week, and it wasn't 7 because they weren't open 7 days a week.
Yeah.
To say he was my guiding light. You know, I got the diagnosis again. Now I'm like 29 and get a diagnosis that I may be having cancer. And I'm like, okay, all I wanted to do is to have my mother cuddle me and say, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
That would never happen.
No.
That would never happen. I laid on that couch by myself, didn't even tell anything to my son after my procedure. I just merely mustered up the courage, got up every morning, drove him to school.
The biggest thing I tell people this all the time, that the greatest power that we have as human beings is the power of choice. And you have described that so beautifully today in terms of how many times in your journey could you have chosen the other way? And it might have been the easier way, actually.
And nobody would have blamed me.
Right. I wouldn't have blamed you. But you kept choosing the challenging way, the ways that's going to get you to where you want to go, to the dreams and goals and aspirations that you had, and you kept choosing to go that way. Again, I'm just going to ask this: when you're making those choices, did your son have such a big part of that in making those choices? Hey, I got to do this not only for me, but I got to do this for him.
I had to teach him. I had to show him, you know, for instance, when I came home one day, I finally decided to go back to university. I went through a major breakup, a lot of life events that led to that anyone could have checked out. And it was difficult. And I was going to go into law school at that time. So talk about universe.
Awesome. Yeah.
And then I chose not to, because I was no longer in a stable place where I can provide that for my son. And I said, okay, he's priority number one. I can put my dreams on the back burner. See, my dreams never changed. I changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm going to repeat that because I think it warrants
it does.
repeat. My dreams didn't change. I changed. I started to become more authentic, more vulnerable, more connected to my feelings and my life, because before it was like, oh, it's all perfect. No, it's not perfect. Okay. At the age of 29, when I was going back to university to get a dual MBA, I had 6 years. They gave me 6 years to complete it. And I came home and I'm like, son, I knew that I had to do it. because it was in my heart to do it, and because it provided more opportunities for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at him, and he was 14 at the time, and I'm like, son, I'm going to go back to university, and they're giving me 6 years. I know I can do it in 2. And at one point he's looking at me, and we're standing in the kitchen. He's right by the refrigerator. And he says, Mom, what do you want? I want to do it in 2 years. Okay, then go for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what does that mean? Because there's an impact. There's a trade-off. Son, I'm not going to be home as much. You're going to be responsible for more things around, or whatever that was in that moment. And of course, my friends helped me pull through. And I didn't do it. I didn't graduate in 2 years. I graduated in 1.5. Okay. I graduated
so awesome.
in 18.5 months. Okay.
That's so awesome.
So my dream, as I was starting, the same time that I did my application, I did a fellowship application, which I didn't get it. In my fellowship application, I talked about building a new business where America can thrive. I talked about building a home from the ground up so that my son can have that privilege. I talked about my future, our life. All of that came true. We started building our home literally months before I graduated. Like September of 2006 is when we broke ground on that house in Boulder.
That's awesome. It's awesome.
In Boulder, of all places.
Yeah.
And then, life comes, and, and I want to share that little bit of the story, because it's like, I'm working 70 hours a week.
Yeah.
I'm traveling around the state on a weekly basis, sometimes 2-3 times a week. I'm coming home really late. Friends are helping me out. I'm arriving home at 3 o'clock in the morning, taking them to school at 7:30 in the morning. Life, it's what I do, it's what I choose to do in that moment. And say, we get up late, and I'm like, son, we've got up late. How about you take a shower? I'll make our breakfast, and I'll meet you in the car. There's a difference. I have a choice to treat him with love and compassion and humanity, no matter what happens.
Yeah.
It's not going to serve anyone to be upset in the morning. So many things. I do want to share one more thing. I'm probably coming up on time, right?
No, we're good. We're good.
Okay.
This is
All right.
so
Making sure. So as we're moving forward, we build that house. We're building the house. And then I realized, that I could not afford it.
Yeah.
That I was like $10,000 shy financially from my income, from my monthly income, that I had to, or not a monthly, the whole yearly income that I couldn't afford. And I'm like, gosh, I couldn't get a promotion. And then I got an extra job. So that made it happen. I decided to figure it out. I remember one day, talk about the power of belief. I worked on Thursdays. I would teach class in Denver, drive to Alamosa, teach class until about 9:30 p.m., drive back home, make it home by 3:30 in the morning, take him to school, go to work all day, teach in Longmont, and drive all the way to Lakewood, make it there about 10:30 at night. And then in the morning, we would go visit the house on Saturday, because I wanted to teach him, if you want something, you go get it.
Yeah.
You can have whatever you want to
Yeah.
have, as long as you go get it and you put forth the effort. And I remember one day when I had found out that I couldn't afford the house right before, trying to figure it all out. And I stood here's the shell of the house. And I'm by the window facing the flat irons. It's all covered in plastic. And I said, this is our house.
Yeah.
Like, I can feel it. This is our house. This belongs to us. And to keep that promise inside of me, that he would know the privilege of what it was to build a home and have a home and be in a home. That the day that I closed on that, after I graduated from university, months later, I graduated in April, and I coming over around in July, when I went to go close on that house, I opened up that door, walked straight to that window, stood right there. And as I'm looking, standing in the same place, I'm like, whew, the tears are coming down my face, because I knew that moment would happen, because I believed that moment would happen.
Yeah.
Because I would do whatever it took for that moment to happen.
It's awesome. What an awesome story. Wow. You're blowing me away here. So let's try to fast forward, or not fast forward, but let's just talk about what you're doing now. and how all that evolved into what you're doing now. And you mentioned something earlier, and the word was service of others. And again, greater purpose. Your purpose is greater than yourself when you're serving others. Why don't you explain to our listeners what you're doing now and how that evolved into what you're doing now, the leadership training and so forth.
Today, I first want to put some foundation into that. At the age of 33, I was an empty nester. I had the car, the house, the kid, the education, the business, more than what I could have ever dreamt.
Yeah.
As a little girl.
Yeah.
And there I was, I had it all. And as I turned 34, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor.
Oh, no, jeez.
So I'm thinking, okay, so all this time I have my business, all this time I have things going on for myself. What really came through in that moment for me was that I hadn't lived my passion. I hadn't acknowledged my gifts. I had coached all this time from the age of 19 on. As a matter of fact, I was coaching family members at the age of 15 and professionally from the age of 19. Here I was 34 years old, and I had not acknowledged that as a gift. And that was the moment where I decided, as the doctor told me, Rocio, you have three choices. You can have a stroke and die anytime. Let it take, as you let it take its course, have this type of invasive surgery, have radiation. I said, okay, fine. In that, it helped me discover what was important to me, which was to be of service, to continue to be of service, because my entire work has always been for-profit, nonprofit, both simultaneously, half-time, full-time, half-time, whatever that was, to help people break through, to teach them what is possible. It is not about money. It's not about time, energy, money, resources, education, networks, any of that. It has everything to do with each of us, what's inside of us. So I had the privilege throughout time to go do my own hokey pokey moment, because although I had led so many people along the way, nobody had ever led me. Mm-hmm. Nobody had helped me discover. I was numb to my life, and I had to wake up. I had to wake up to the abuse. Stop pretending that it didn't happen. I had to wake up to the forgiveness. Stop forgiving when you haven't processed. And I had to wake up to what it was costing me in life. So the brain tumor was like my greatest gift. It allowed me to wake up. And I said, okay, if this is all I have, I want to spend it with people so that they can discover what's important to them, so that they can have a life, so that they won't be like I was in that moment, facing life, death in the face, right there, looking at my whole life and saying, I haven't lived. Yeah. I've been going through motions, chasing money, doing things. And then that's where I dedicated that I would create products and services that will help people. This is where my book Unstoppable came from, as a matter of fact. And it's here, I'll add it into the chat as you help other people to write the system. How do you take over your mind? How do you look at life through a different lens? How do you see what you're not seeing? Because when we see things that we're blinded to, because we all have blind spots. 90% of our life is blind spots. We just don't know them yet. Mm-hmm. To discover, they go through a process of rediscovering and discovering and connecting with self. And that's where they get to where they want to be. All of our work, you can use it from now until forever. Now until it's exhausted. And, we've seen so much work from like Napoleon Hill and Jim Rome and all these amazing Claude Bristow, people that have been gone for decades, and some people that I've studied that have been gone for centuries. Mm-hmm. It's still truth in the world. So the other thing that I did is I'm bringing out this game, the MindShift Game, the game that makes you a winner. And that game is to take all the principles that I've learned throughout my life, that vision, the power of belief, taking courageous actions, building confidence, stepping into your power, elevating your energy, reviewing and reflecting what I taught my son at the age of 4, how to reflect in life, what is going to happen, that opportunity, and put it all into a beautiful card game. It is
awesome.
a physical board game. It has a board game. It has these beautiful cards. And these are all the things that I named right now. There you have the courage. These are affirmations. You have the confidence into that. You have the vision that you expand into that. That one's the eagle is the vision. The horse is the power. We come into the energy, which is the hummingbird. People wake up in the morning. They start their day just like I started every day. I have my journal beside my bed, and it is the first 20 minutes of the day are the most important. Those are the most creative. That is when we absorb things. I started with gratitude.
Yeah.
I started by asking myself, what strengths am I going to focus on? Is it the strength of love, the strength of courage? What strength, what feelings do I want to connect with today? And that's the same process that people go through, and they start taking bold actions. They read the cards, they take 3 cards of the same category and reflect on them. What does it mean to me in my life right now in my life? The beauty of the game and the success of the coaching has been that the coaching has always molded itself around the individual, not the other way around.
Right.
A lot of people start the other way around, and it's like, for us, it's been the book molds itself around the individual. The game, it starts to ask people, how do you take courageous actions? How do you build courageous actions? Is different for all of us. And then we start seeing people that are popping up like popcorn, people that have had more success, words out of their mouth, in 10 months than what they had in 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
How is that possible?
Yeah.
It's because it's designed for them to succeed.
It's awesome. How do we get it? How do we get the book, the game, and how do they get a hold of you to come work with their companies and so forth?
Definitely. They can reach out. They can call me directly at 303-587. And yes, I'm giving my phone number, 303-587-8367. They can email me at Rocio@inventivaconsulting.com. You can reach me via LinkedIn. You can also reach me via the MindShiftGame.com. And we also have a new company, which is where the MindShift Game lives now. And that one is under Virtuous. It's VEERTUOUS. So that is our new company where we're helping people. Everything that we do from this point forward is to serve humanity. That is it.
Beautiful. Gosh. Wow. I have 3 questions before we go. My book is called The 3 Ps, Finding Your Purpose, Perspective, and Passion. I want you to tell us what your purpose in life is.
My purpose in life is to serve humanity. I'm here to be a tool.
Okay. And what is I'm going to skip over to passion. What's your passion in life?
My passion in life is to watch people succeed, and specifically to watch small children live a happy, healthy, wealthy life.
I love that. And I have a saying that purpose equals passion and passion equals purpose. And what holds it together is your perspective. So what's your perspective on life?
My perspective on life is that we can create anything. We can be, do, and have anything that we desire as long as we look inside of us. That everything is perfect. And just like this beautiful orchid over here, it was in its own perfection inside of that seed, that all the answers are inside of us. And when we look inside, we find gold that we haven't discovered. We find dreams that we hadn't tapped into. We find tools that have been there for us to share with humanity. See, all of this doesn't belong to us. Mm-hmm. It belongs to the world. We're here to deliver it, just like others are here to deliver it for us. To look inside. When we look inside, we can see what's actually there.
I have one last question. There are many people out there who have hopes and dreams and goals and all those things in their mind, but they're too afraid to go for it. They're too afraid to step out of their comfort zone. They're too afraid to take that risk. What would you say to them?
Take the leap. Take the shot. Be Michael Jordan. Get on the court. Take the shot. You've got this, and you know that you've got this. Get yourself into a state of mind. Do jumping jacks. Do something that excites you, that creates a window of possibility. And it starts too by doing something different every day. I wake up every morning, I find something different to do. So we get into these hypnotic, robotic ways of being. And that's what becomes our comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And we become uncomfortable. Yet when that becomes a way of life, life becomes easier. Comb your hair with your left hand if you comb it with your right hand. Drink your tea instead of you drinking coffee. Visit somebody that you would normally not visit. Do an act of kindness. Practice gratitude if you don't. Find something that's different every single day. And we start to create these habits in life that create our life. Because everything that we have lived is only what we will be living in the future unless we change something. You've got to change the input in order to change the output.
Mm-hmm.
And if nothing changes, nothing changes. It just looks different.
Yeah.
It looks like a different relationship, yet it's still, it's a different guy with the same head, a different guy, different head, right? Same guy, different head. Same woman, different
Mm-hmm.
body, whatever it may be. It's still the same person that we're dating, or still the same things that we're doing. And then look inside of us, take responsibility for who we are. Take that time to reflect for who we are, where we've been, where we're at now, and determine that if where we're at now, would we live that same day forever? Because that's essentially what we'll do unless we change something.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. One of the things that's fueling me on this journey that I'm on right now, being the Vistage chair and doing some speaking and, writing the book and doing the podcast and everything else, is this one thing really bothers me. And I read it through a Gallup poll that 70% of Americans are disengaged at work. And
that's costing billions of dollars a year.
Billions in productivity. But I sit there and I look at that and I think, I was a 30-year educator, loved it, lived my passion, lived my purpose every day. Every day wasn't great, there's challenges and so forth, but I never felt like I went to work. And I sit there and think about 7 out of 10 people driving down I-25 every day going to work are mad or upset or anxiety. They have stress because they're going to something they don't like to do. But the hard thing for them is to take that risk, to take that leap out of it. And I think what you've helped people do today is say to them, it's okay to take that risk, to go for it, to do what and you might fail at it, but at least you failed trying.
Right.
Because I have another saying that I have a hat that says fear, regret. I used to tell my players that all the time, fear, regret. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that you do everything you possibly can to get to your goal, your dreams, your aspirations, so that if you get there or you don't get there, at least you gave everything you had to get there. And you can live with yourself with that. It's those people who have those dreams, goals, and aspirations who never take that leap of faith or that risk or that process, winning the process to get there. They're the ones who live with regret. And I don't want people to have regret. And so what you've done today is tell people, you basically have told people, it's okay to go for it. It's okay to step out. It's okay, to try something different. Even if it's, like you said, combing your hair with your left hand, if you comb it with your right hand. I don't have much hair left anymore, but that's beautifully, the way you said that is so beautiful because it's given people permission to do that. Because some people don't give themselves permission to do that. And you're an amazing person. And I want to thank you for coming on. You have some stuff, I'm just going to kind of read it, but you have a consulting service, which you've talked about. You also wrote that book that we all should read. You have a 7-step coaching process that you kind of teach and help people go through. Because the other part of that 70% of people who are disengaged at work is what I read was 85% of those 70% say it's because of the leader they work for. So you and I are both on a quest to help leaders get better and understand it and do those things. So there's a lot of things that people can look upon and look to you for guidance for, and I hope they do. So I want to thank you for coming on. This has been amazing. I can't believe it's already been over an hour that we've been on this. It feels like we just started, but Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing your story and letting people know it's okay to make the choices to make themselves better.
Thank you. It's such an honor and a privilege. And thank you for the work that you do to help touch, move, and inspire and move people forward and get them to live a happy, healthy, wealthy life.
You're amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to this week's edition of the People Progressing podcast. I have to apologize. I haven't had our podcast on for about a month. I had to have some knee surgery, and it's been kind of putting me out, but doing well now, and I'm just excited to get back into it. And what a great first guest we had back after that with Rocio Perez today, and what a great story. And if you need to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me through coachjoewhiteconsulting.com. My email address and so forth is on there. You can get my book off of there and so forth as well. So I'd love to come speak with your groups, and I hope everything's good, and keep progressing. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.